Break through the noise and see the world with a silver vision that highlights the beauty and the lessons in every struggle. We redefine digital storytelling by showing you the hidden side of life. Subscribe today and start seeing the world through our unique lens.
My stepbrother was standing in the doorway of my apartment wearing my father's watch, the one Dad left me specifically in the will, and he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You should be grateful we're even letting you say goodbye to the place." I had been living in that apartment for 4 years. I paid the mortgage, I painted the walls, I picked out every piece of furniture. And I was standing in my own hallway with a cardboard box in my arms while my stepbrother's wife walked past me carrying my grandmother's china like it was already hers. "We need the space," he said. "Tiffany's pregnant, you understand." I understood perfectly. I just didn't say what I understood yet. Before I tell you how I dismantled everything they built on top of my name, tell me in the comments, what is the most entitled thing someone in your family has ever taken from you? I read every single one. I drove to a motel 40 minutes from the city, not because I had to. I have a decent income. I'm a contract attorney at a mid-sized firm in Atlanta, and I have savings. I went to the motel because I needed to think without anyone watching me think. There is a difference between having nowhere to go and choosing to disappear while you figure out your next move. My stepbrother had spent 32 years assuming I was the first kind of person. He was about to learn I was the second. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context my family spent years trying to bury. My father remarried when I was 9. My stepbrother, his new wife's son, was 11. His name is Colt. I'll use it once so you understand who I'm talking about, and then I'll just call him what he is, my stepbrother. Not because I'm trying to be cold. Because by the time this story ends, the word stepbrother will carry more weight than any name could. My stepbrother and I were never close. We weren't enemies either, not at first. We were just two kids orbiting the same house without any real gravity between us. He had his mother, I had my dad. The household worked because everyone stayed in their lane. Then my dad got sick. It started as a back thing. Turned out to be something in his spine that had been building for years. He spent the last 18 months of his life mostly in a chair by the window, watching the yard he used to mow every Saturday go a little wilder each week. I moved back home to help. I quit a job I liked in Charlotte, broke a lease, packed my car, and drove 12 hours south because he was my father, and that's what you do. My stepbrother visited 4 times in those 18 months. 4. I counted. When Dad died, the will was clear. The house went to his wife, my stepmother, for her lifetime. But the condo in Atlanta, the one he bought as an investment property when I was in law school, the one I had been renting from him at below market rate for years, that one went to me outright. It was in his handwriting on a separate letter inside the will envelope. The deed transfer was already prepared. His lawyer walked us through it at the reading. My stepbrother sat across the table and smiled like he'd heard something he already knew was temporary. I should have understood the smile then. I cataloged it and moved on. That was my first mistake. The deed transfer took about 6 weeks to process, standard. During that time, I was still living in the condo, still paying the utilities, still treating it the way I always had, as mine, just with the paperwork catching up. My stepmother called me twice in that window. Once to ask if I'd found any of Dad's old insurance documents in his desk, once to tell me Colt and Tiffany were thinking about relocating to Atlanta for Tiffany's job. I said that was nice. I meant it, actually. Atlanta is a big city. The deed transfer came through on a Thursday. I remember because I got the confirmation email at my desk at work, and I just sat there for a second with my hands in my lap. It was mine. Officially, completely, finally mine. I forwarded the email to my personal account, printed a copy, and put it in the filing cabinet under my bed when I got home that night. 3 weeks later, my stepbrother had a locksmith change my locks. I came home from a work dinner to find a key that didn't fit my own front door. There was a sticky note on the door in Tiffany's handwriting. It said, "We left your things in boxes in the storage unit downstairs. Access code is the same. Take care." I stood in that hallway for a long time. I want to be honest about those minutes, because I think people assume that someone who handles conflict well doesn't actually feel it. I felt it. I sat down on the hallway floor with my back against my own locked door, and I felt the specific, nauseating humiliation of being erased from a place you built. The throw rug I bought in Savannah was on the other side of that door. The dent in the kitchen wall from when I dropped a cast iron pan was on the other side of that door. Every morning for 4 years, I'd made coffee in that kitchen, and now someone else was sleeping in my bed and I was on the floor in the hall. I gave myself 20 minutes. Then I called a car, went to the motel, and started working. The first call I made was to my colleague, Barris. He's a property litigation attorney, the kind who gets called when someone tries to steal a building rather than a bike. I sent him 2 referrals in the past year. He owed me a favor and he knew it. I didn't even finish the sentence before he said, "Send me the deed." I sent it. He called back in 11 minutes. "You have the deed," he said. "Clean title transfer. There's no contest here legally. The issue is going to be practical." They changed the locks. Right, and if they claim they've been residing there, paying utilities, receiving mail, even for 3 weeks, a Georgia judge might slow walk the removal. Especially if Tiffany's visibly pregnant by the time we get in front of anyone. He paused. "Also, I need to ask, did you at any point give anyone verbal permission to stay there temporarily? A text? An email? Anything?" I thought about it. I had said out loud at Thanksgiving dinner that Colt and Tiffany were welcome to crash at the condo if they ever came through Atlanta. Offhand, hospitable. The kind of thing you say over mashed potatoes that you don't expect anyone to screenshot. "There might be a text," I said. Barris exhaled. "Okay, that complicates it. Not fatally, but it complicates it. They'll use it to argue invited guests, establish a tenancy dispute, drag this into civil court. You could win, but it takes time. Months, maybe more. And the longer they're in there, the messier it gets." I thanked him and hung up. I lay on the motel bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling, and I thought about my options with the same detachment I use when I'm reviewing a contract for a client. Strip out the emotion. What are the actual levers here? Lever 1, standard eviction. Slow, public. They'd fight it, and fighting it was probably the point. Get me in a protracted legal battle, drain my energy and maybe some of my savings, and eventually negotiate a cash settlement to leave. That was the play. I could see it clearly. Flavor 2, criminal complaint for breaking and entering. Harder to prove than it sounds. They'd argue the sticky note counted as communication, that they moved in under the invitation I'd carelessly extended, that there was no criminal intent. Neither lever was the right one. I went to sleep. At 2 a.m., I woke up and couldn't get back under. I made bad motel coffee and opened my laptop and started doing what I actually do well, which is reading documents until I find the thing nobody else thought to look for. I started with my father's estate file. I had access to it. I was named executor, which was another thing my stepbrother hadn't mentioned to his lawyer yet, or maybe had mentioned and been told didn't matter because executors don't automatically inherit. He wasn't wrong about that. But executors do have full access to the estate's financial history during the administration period, and I hadn't finished administering it. I started pulling documents. My father's finances were, to put it gently, a late-life mess. He'd been generous in the disorganized way that people who love easily tend to be. Loans to family members, handshake agreements, money moved in ways that made bookkeeping complicated. None of it illegal, just tangled. But as I went through the records, something caught my eye. 18 months before my father died, there was a wire transfer, $62,000, from my father's investment account to a joint account held by my stepbrother and Tiffany. The memo line said, "Loan for business startup." I sat up straighter. I searched the estate file for any promissory note, any signed agreement, any acknowledgement of debt. I found nothing. Not a word on paper. The money had left my father's account and gone to my stepbrother's account, and there was no document in the estate file treating it as anything other than a gift. Except under Georgia estate law, it isn't automatically a gift. A transfer of that size without documentation to an heir, or in this case, to someone adjacent to an heir, can be treated as an advancement against inheritance, or in some circumstances, as an undisclosed debt owed to the estate. It depends on intent. It depends on what was said. It depends on what the executor, who has a fiduciary duty to the estate's creditors and beneficiaries, decides to investigate. I was the executor. I sat in that motel room and I felt something click into place. Not anger. Not revenge. Something colder and more useful than either. I was looking at leverage. Real leverage. The kind that doesn't require a judge's timeline. I didn't call Barris back that night. I needed one more thing first. I spent the next 2 days being completely invisible. No calls to my stepbrother. No messages to my stepmother. I watched Tiffany's social media. She posts constantly. And I saw exactly what I expected. Photos of my living room redecorated with throw pillows, a selfie in my kitchen with a coffee mug, and a caption about new beginnings. A reel of her walking through our new Atlanta home with upbeat music and afternoon light through my windows. She used the word "our" 4 times in the caption. My stepbrother commented a heart. I screenshotted everything and saved it to a folder labeled, very boringly, Atlanta Property Documentation. Then I called my father's estate attorney, a methodical woman named Mrs. Bias Calloway, and I told her I had discovered an undocumented transfer from the estate that required investigation before we could close administration. She asked me to send the wire records. I did. She called me back the next morning. "This is significant," she said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. "As executor, you have standing to treat this as an estate debt. If it was a loan with no promissory note, the estate can demand repayment. The beneficiary in this case, your stepmother, actually has an interest in that money being recovered because it's part of the estate value. And if they can't repay it," I asked, already knowing, "then the estate has a claim against their assets," she said, "which could include, depending on what they own, real property, accounts, anything in their names." They had 3 weeks of mail at my address. They had a joint bank account. They had a car registered in my stepbrother's name, and they were currently squatting in a property they did not own, with a text message from me and no lease and no legal standing that would survive scrutiny once I brought a full estate claim into the picture. I let another day pass. I needed them comfortable. I needed them posting living room selfies and ordering furniture online and genuinely believing they had won something. Then I called my stepbrother. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he was waiting for me to beg. I made my voice quiet, a little tired, the voice of someone who has run out of fight. "I don't want to do this anymore," I said. "I've been thinking about it, and honestly, Dad would have hated this. He would have wanted us to be okay. And I think Tiffany having the baby there, maybe that's actually what's supposed to happen. Maybe I should just let it go." There was a pause, the satisfied kind. "I'm glad you're seeing it that way," my stepbrother said. "We're family. We shouldn't be fighting over square footage." "I know," I said. I want to make it official, so there's no legal ambiguity later. I want to deed the property to you. Put it in your and Tiffany's names outright." "Yeah," he said, and I could hear him trying not to sound too eager. "Yeah, that makes sense. Clean it up." "There's just a thing I need to walk through with you in person," I said. "Some executor paperwork I have to close out before I can initiate the transfer. Can you and Tiffany come downtown Thursday?" He said yes. Of course he said yes. I booked the conference room at Barris's firm for 2 hours. I arranged for a notary and a court reporter. I told my stepbrother it was routine, that the building required documentation for title transfers, that it would take maybe 45 minutes, that we'd get lunch after if he wanted. He showed up in a blazer. Tiffany wore a dress I recognized. It was mine, taken from my closet, a green wrap dress I'd bought 2 years ago and never seen again after the lockout. She was showing enough that it pulled at the waist. She looked at me with the careful neutrality of someone who knows they've done something but has decided not to acknowledge it. My stepbrother looked at the court reporter and the camera on the tripod and the notary at the side table and said, "This seems like a lot for a title transfer." "Buildings particular," I said. "They require recorded testimony for transfers involving estate property. It's Atlanta. Everything here is overcomplicated." He laughed. He sat down. Barris walked in, set his briefcase on the table, and sat across from them without smiling. "Before we begin," Barris said, "I want to make sure everyone understands what this proceeding is. This is a sworn deposition, recorded and transcribed. Everything said in this room is on the record. Do you both understand that?" My stepbrother looked at me. I looked at my hands. "We know," he said. "It's for the condo board. Let's just do it." Barris slid a document across the table. "This is an estate asset acknowledgement form. It asks you to confirm your understanding of transfers and obligations within the estate of the deceased." My stepbrother scanned it. He's not an attorney. He reads contracts the way most people do, looking for where to sign, not for what he's agreeing to. "It also asks," Barris continued, his voice even, "whether you received any financial transfers from the estate in the 24 months prior to the decedent's death, and whether those transfers were documented as loans or gifts." My stepbrother's hand slowed over the paper. "That's just standard estate closure," I said, keeping my voice easy. "It's so the executor me can close out the administration. Once you sign, I can initiate the deed transfer." He picked up the pen. Barris said, without inflection, I'm required to advise you that this document becomes part of the estate record filed with the probate court. Any false statement made under oath in connection with estate administration can constitute estate fraud under Georgia law, which carries criminal penalties. I want to make sure you've had an opportunity to consider whether there are any transfers you need to disclose before signing. The room got quiet. Tiffany looked at my stepbrother. My stepbrother looked at Barris. And for just a second, just a flicker, I saw him do the math. $62,000. No paperwork, the wire transfer that was sitting in my estate file with my name on it as executor. He could refuse to sign and walk away from the deed transfer, walk away from the entire reason he'd come. Or he could sign and either disclose the transfer, which would trigger an estate debt claim against him, or fail to disclose it, which would be fraud on the record. His greed was louder than his instinct. I had built the whole thing on that assumption. He disclosed. He wrote in the box in his own handwriting that the $62,000 was a personal loan from my father, intended to be forgiven upon death. Barris let him finish writing. Then he slid a second document across the table. This, Barris said, is the estate's demand letter for repayment of the $62,000 transfer, which the executor has determined was an undocumented loan with no forgiveness clause in the will or estate documents. You have 30 days to respond. My stepbrother stared at the paper. And this, Barris said, placing a third document on top, is the notice that the executor is initiating a formal review of the occupancy of the Atlanta property, which is titled solely in the executor's name, and that any parties currently residing there without a valid lease will be asked to vacate within 72 hours or face removal proceedings, which, given the fraud-related documentation now in the estate file, will be expedited. Tiffany made a sound I can only describe as swallowed. My stepbrother looked at me. His face had gone the color of old wallpaper. You set this up, he said. I didn't answer that. There wasn't a good answer that was also honest and also kind, so I just looked at him the way he had looked at me in the hallway of my apartment, calm and unbothered, wearing someone else's confidence like it belonged to him. You don't have the money, I said. It wasn't a question. You spent it. The business didn't work. That's fine. That's what happens with startups. But you spend $62,000 of my father's money with nothing on paper. And now the estate needs it back. And you're in my apartment. And Tiffany is wearing my dress. I don't know why I said the part about the dress. It wasn't strategic. It just came out. Tiffany looked down at herself like she'd forgotten. We can work this out, my stepbrother said. His voice had changed. The blazer version of him had evaporated. He sounded the way he probably sounded at 11 years old, when things went wrong and he needed someone else to fix it. Come on. We're family. I know, I said. I know we are. That's the only reason I'm giving you 72 hours instead of calling the sheriff today. He started to say something else. Barris cut him off. This proceeding is concluded, Barris said. The transcript will be filed with the probate court by end of business today. You'll receive copies of all 3 documents by email within the hour. If you have legal representation, I suggest you contact them today. The court reporter started packing up her machine. The notary capped her pen. My stepbrother sat in the chair with his hands flat on the table, looking at the documents, and I watched him understand, in real time, in slow increments, that the thing he thought he'd outmaneuvered had never been what he thought it was. Tiffany gathered her bag. She didn't look at me again. At the door, my stepbrother turned back. Dad would be disappointed in you, he said. He meant it to hurt. I thought about my father in his chair by the window. I thought about 18 months of grocery runs and prescription pickups and bad TV at 2 a.m. Because he couldn't sleep and neither could I, and sometimes the only thing you can do at 2 a.m. is watch cooking competitions and make each other laugh. He left me the condo, I said. He knew who I was. The door closed. I sat in that conference room for a few minutes after they left. Barris poured 2 cups of water from the pitcher on the side table and pushed one toward me and didn't say anything, which is exactly what a good lawyer does when a client needs a minute. The fallout moved faster than I expected. My stepbrother contacted my stepmother before he even left the building parking lot, I think, because she called me 40 minutes later crying. I let it go to voicemail. She called twice more. On the third one, she left a message saying I was destroying the family my father spent his life building. I listened to it once and then I went and got dinner because I hadn't eaten since breakfast. My stepbrother's lawyer, he hired one, quickly, which told me the $62,000 hurt more than he'd shown. Sent a letter arguing the transfer was an anticipated inheritance advancement, not a loan. Barris responded with 4 pages of Georgia estate code and a note that we were prepared to go to probate court. 3 weeks later, they settled. $62,000 repaid to the estate in installments, which will eventually be distributed to my stepmother, who is legally the primary beneficiary. She hasn't called me since. I'm not sure what my stepbrother told her about what happened in that conference room. I don't particularly need to know. They were out of my apartment in 61 hours. 2 hours before the deadline. I know, because I was parked down the street. I watched the moving truck. I don't know where they went and I didn't ask. When I walked back in for the first time, someone had taken the throw rug from Savannah. Everything else was still there, rearranged and slightly wrong. Like when you come home from a long trip and the furniture feels shifted even though nothing moved. I stood in the middle of the living room and I looked at the dent in the kitchen wall from the cast iron pan. It was still there. I ordered dinner in that night, ate it at my own kitchen table. The place felt strange for a few weeks, the way a space feels after someone has been in it without your permission. But that passed. Things like that always pass if you let them. I'd had people tell me I should have just evicted them quietly. Kept the peace, not made it ugly. And I understand that instinct. It comes from a good place. But here's the thing about people who will change your locks and wear your clothes and call it family. They don't stop. A quiet eviction would have been a negotiation. It would have been one more transaction in a long series of transactions where I gave and they took, and the gap between those two things was called gratitude. I needed to close the account completely, not out of cruelty, out of accuracy. I needed them to know exactly what they had done and exactly what it cost them, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed them to stop seeing me as an available resource. I don't have a relationship with my stepbrother anymore. I don't have one with my stepmother either. I send a card at Christmas because my father would have wanted that, and I mean it in the small, sincere way that it's meant. But I don't have dinner with them. I don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize. I don't loan money or square footage to people who've shown me what they do with both. The condo still has the paint I picked. The kitchen still has the dent. I made coffee this morning in the same mug I've had for 6 years and watched the light come in through the window and thought about nothing in particular. It's mine. It was always mine. I just had to remind a few people of that in a language they actually understood.